Greetings, everyone! I'm the delicious and mythical GriffinMuffin. Politics in video games. These four words evoke a lot of feelings and opinions. For me, all art we make is inherently political, because art is a depiction of how we perceive the world, which is shaped by politics, be that by politicians or by the people. I said in my last video that video games are art. I want to expand this maxim further by saying that video games, like other mediums of art, can be political. The mediums of art, such as cinema, painting, literature, have had hundreds of years to cultivate the necessary tools of political commentary. Video games are not quite there yet. I think Disco Elysium, though, has harnessed some necessary techniques and actually brings a new perspective to political ideologies to the table. In terms of discussing politics, Disco Elysium refers to four ideologies: fascism, ultraliberalism, moralism, and communism. Until the Final Cut version of Disco Elysium, the political ideologies existed as flavor for whatever kind of person you wanted Harry to be. However, the Final Cut contains actual political vision quests, each being culminations for each ideology. I've made this video because I want to glean how these ideologies are treated in the game's writing. I also want to pick apart the structural elements of the vision quests that explore the ideologies to see how future RPGs can use these elements to shape the way we discuss politics in video games. And I basically want to make another video on Disco Elysium. Before we go on, I should mention that this video is based on the idea you've completed Disco Elysium at least once. I will be discussing the vision quests in great detail here. But with that out of the way, grab yourself a bottle of potent Pilsner, maybe slide off those T500 ceramic boots you stole off a corpse, and if you're into that sort of stuff, maybe even have some Pyrrolidone. We're about to do it disco style. Wander into the pale and get thrown face first against the world of Elysium once again. This is the Ideological Dissection. For love, forever sure. In Disco Elysium, fascism doesn't really stray from what we know about it. Anyone who studied the rise of fascism in history class, read Fascism by Umberto Eco, or Origins of Totalitarianism by Hannah Arendt are privy to what fascism actually is. A reactionary ideology to oppose modernity or other prominent political movements, or to address the frustrations of a forgotten class of society. Fascism follows very basic, almost primal tenets: hunt the outsider, the power of birthright, uphold tradition, and believe in the leader. It simply finds things that are different compared to the nostalgic recreation of their society or nation from days gone, and proclaims those lost aspects to be the undoing of their great nation. Once you have said enough nationalist pieces of dialogue, the endurance aspect of your consciousness will contact you. I found that quite appropriate because, in my opinion, fascism originates from some deep pain. Funnily enough, in a book I was reading at the time of writing this script, the author cites scientific literature that suggests pain and the excessive use of opioids and alcohol are linked to voting for far-right political parties, which to me says that fascism does in fact stem from pain, be that physical or existential. The Thought Cabinet feature in Disco Elysium can be used to analyze how fascism is presented in the game. One core aspect of fascism is racial or ethnic hierarchy. On day one, you can adopt the thought known as advanced race theory from the Seminoles eugenicist known as Measurehead. The conversation you have with him upon completing the thought is a reference to fascists needing an empowering narrative to fuel their xenophobia and a sense of racial superiority, a hero narrative. Race theory is never about observations grounded in scientific evidence, but something to lift certain peoples into a hero status. A social myth is a powerful thing in any ideology. You can also acquire the Revacholian nationhood thought by saying enough traditionalist dialogue choices. After activating the thought, every time you say a nationalist piece of dialogue, you actually lose morale. Losing morale every time you spout something fascist makes you consider putting more points into volition, which provides more points of morale for Harry. Which to me is it's a commentary of how being fascist makes you emotionally hardened as an individual. At first, I thought it was the writers of the game punishing you for being a fascist. As I played through the other ideologies though, there are ways the game punishes you for picking either ultraliberalism, moralism, or communism in different ways. So no, I don't think it's picking fascism out on its own. In fact, the thought does provide a huge buff when you drink alcohol. It is saying something though about the nature of fascism, that it is demoralizing. To feel alienated in a world that has changed to something you hate must be a horrible way to live your life. Now we have to move on to the vision quest associated with fascism. I highly recommend you get a reality lowdown from Joyce Messier before day 4 of the investigation to get the jamais vu thought. Firstly, to get this thought, you'll need to talk to Lena, the cryptozoologist's wife, about how you've lost all your memory, which will then lead you to talking to Joyce. You will need to have the thought jamais vu completed by the time you start your vision quest. Otherwise, you risk not being able to talk to Measurehead, which is a major portion of the vision quest. The final part of this quest can be intense. You will lose a total of 2 morale and 4 health to finish it. Be prepared. I don't think you can do a sober fascist run. Drink some booze just before you have to look yourself in the mirror. I hope those tips can help you get started. I'll now be discussing the quest itself. On the 4th day of the investigation, your endurance aspect will contact you, saying that you need to question other traditionalists about how to travel back in time, which in itself seems pretty on point for this game in terms of absurdity. When you talk to Renee in the dialogue branch regarding your vision quest, you're met with this idea that the past is painful for him. He was devoted more to the suzerain than the budding love between Jean-Marie and himself. You can therefore interpret his rampant traditionalism as a coping mechanism for losing the love of his life. Then you can talk to the fat lorry driver, another traditionalist. Something important is revealed when you succeed the red logic check with him. The lorry driver feels impotent in the struggle of finding someone who will find him attractive or a mate. He believes that just by existing as a man, he should just have a woman, but rationalizes his inability to compete with other men who he perceives as more virile and attractive than himself as the problem. This theme of genetic competition will come up again when we talk to Measurehead. One of the core dialogues in the Vision Quest is the moment when Measurehead deems you worthy to discuss man to man about the nature of time travel and women. In the conversation with Measurehead, the topic of sexuality is framed as a form of genetic competition, that winning the competition of sex and passing on your genes is to win the future. One thing that this conversation reminds me of is the philosophical underpinnings of somatic materialism. The idea that most of what determines our lives stems from biological origins and our animal senses and needs. These experiences create what could be defined as the human spirit, and our needs for love and sex define our desires. Measurehead says that Harry losing the love of his life has left him crippled, that he uses this obsession with the past like heart medication to keep moving. He claims that the present is far more meaningful to pursue, that Harry should look forward rather than cling to the rotting corpse of the past. Within the context of the game, we can see how the writing leans into this new thesis behind fascism. To state my earlier thesis, that fascism is a reactionary ideology to oppose modernity or other prominent political movements or to address the frustrations of a forgotten class of society. This new thesis the game proposes is that it is a reactionary ideology centered around the feeling of being outgunned in a society of sexual competition. At the end of the quest, Harry confronts himself in the mirror. Through a paroxysm of physical and emotional pain, he becomes the icebreaker, a being so devoted to Revachol he, metaphorically speaking, shoots his own soul with a shotgun in a dark basement to emerge as an unbreakable being, devoid of humanity. In my previous narrative breakdown video, I refer to René Arnault and his traditionalist ways as a hindrance to his humanity, that he was never able to feel happy after the fall of the suzerain. The game treats the fascist vision quest of traveling to the past with such utter absurdity that people treat you like a lunatic. A lot of real-world traditionalists, conservatives, and other fascia do appear that way. I think not only in the game, but also in real life, that belittling these people as deranged lunatics doesn't do us any good. These people are in existential pain. While I don't agree with them or try to console them in any way, I think it's important to walk away with the idea that one day one of these people might become the icebreaker, sacrificing their soul to a cause. And in doing so, they can bring untold harm and suffering to innocent people, all in the name of love. A man of the free market. The ultraliberalism ideology is coding for the real-world ideology of free market fundamentalism or neoliberalism, an ideology that has been relatively nascent across most of the 20th century to really come into form during the late 1980s. You can also interpret ultraliberalism as anarcho-capitalism. In either case, they are cousins of the ideology of liberalism. Anarcho-capitalism and neoliberalism, however, share a core tenet that the exchange between people in societies can be reduced to purely economic and values the self-interested drives of individuals. This then reifies as the free market, power of the individual, social Darwinism, and a de-emphasis on monetary and fiscal policies in democratic governments, or even a complete rollback of the state. The big thing they go on about is taxes. Once you say enough free market fundamentalist pieces of dialogue, the aspect of your psyche known as savoir-faire, good old savvy, will contact you, telling you that even through all your hard work with your feet on the pavement, on the verge of a mental breakdown, you're still poor as fuck, because the government is taking your hard-earned money with taxes. This is why Harry is so pornographically poor. But something slips through. Savvy says, "Don't worry, follow me, and I'll win her back." More on this later. Once adopting the ideology by picking up the thought known as indirect modes of taxation, you will gain 1 real for every ultra-liberal piece of dialogue you select. The 15th Indo-tribe thought will also allow you to get 10 centimes for every green orb you select in the game. But beyond that, I found that walking around spouting off about taxes, the value of hard work and the free market, and having all this money didn't really affect anyone. Instead, people are very confused about why you're an ultra-liberal. Seeing at one point, Everard Clare even says to you, "You're not an ultra-liberal and get the fuck out of here." This sort of reaction is apparent throughout an ultra-liberal run. Even Joyce Messier, an actual ultra-liberal, has her doubts that you two are actually alike. Joyce Messier tells you that the ultra-liberals in Revachol go back to the days of the suzerain. When the monarchy ruled over the state, they had particular areas of industry that were too large to be centrally managed. So they divided the management of these industries to particular groups of people called Indo-tribes. These Indo-tribes, eventually with time, became massive conglomerates such as Wild Pines. I think the reason why this information is given to us is to allude to the idea that the ultra-liberals never really earned their old money. These profitable industries were handed down to them. It's like a handout, if you will. This correlates with certain real-world history, such as heads of European monarchies granting trade companies monopolies in certain ports or colonies. If you're looking to do the quest yourself, here's a rundown. The ultra-liberal quest was less of a hassle for me than the fascist one was. First off, I didn't need to learn a new thought in order to continue the quest. You will need a good amount of money, say maybe 50 reals saved up, but if you coordinate your thought research times well, you'll have no problem with it. I highly recommend having a high conceptualization skill and even having the actual art degree thought. There is a segment at the end of this quest that will require you to revisit something after the tribunal, so don't forget. With that out of the way, let's break down the quest. On the 4th day of the investigation, Savvy will talk to you about how just running around ranting about the spectral hand of the free market and economic self-interest won't make you rich all on its own, and that it's time to reel in the big bucks. They suggest getting into local art scene. You visit Cindy the Skull and you buy one of her pieces, which is something from when she flicked some paint onto a piece of plastic when she sneezed holding her brush one time. In this part of the quest, there are subtle jabs at wealthy people who collect art. That art is not appreciated for its own sake, that it's a proxy for seeking validation for the hordes of money you have. Hanging a $10,000 piece of art on the wall is more tasteful than just sellotaping all that money to the wall itself. After this, your consciousness chimes in and says to walk around until you can hear a wealthy individual nearby. This will lead you to the mega-rich lightbending guy in the shipping container. If you've had issues getting in here previously, Savvy will help lower the difficulty of the check. The point here is to convince the mega-rich lightbending guy to purchase the art you've bought from Cindy at a profit. This whole interaction plays on the idea that the rich are so disconnected from the suffering of the working class that they seek to commiserate with them at a healthy distance. However, the mega-rich lightbending guy doesn't actually give you money. Instead, he gives you a stock certificate of considerable net worth, making you a net-worthy individual. The game hints every now and then, though, how net worth doesn't mean anything to people in Martinez. You can't buy anything with it, people don't acknowledge you for it. All it really does is just add a bunch of numbers in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Your next phase of the quest is to find a brand manager to expend the value of your net worth. Your search leads you to Idiot Doom Spiral, who does a pro bono job for you to do a public art installation, to spread the word of the man, the brand, Tequila Sunset. Once he does it, you actually have to wait until after the Mercenary Tribunal until the piece is unveiled, and it's actually quite funny. The statue of King Philippe III is covered in parking fines, saying that the vehicle has been parked here for too long and will be towed. This high-concept piece of Idiot Doom Spirals is a satirical piece of how the old ideologies don't have a place in the modern world anymore. In the final part of the quest, Kim asks you why you did all of this. In your available responses, you can say that this wasn't what you intended, or that you did this because the free market willed it, that you wanted to better yourself, and even that you were just bored. But most of the dialogue options funnel into a final, decisive choice, to comment if this was all worth it. And with every choice, I found there was never this sense of achievement. It's just done. I was left feeling that this pursuit of wealth and recognition was kinda pointless. I made Kim laugh, and I got her drunk down on his luck to get back involved with the community again and supported the local art scene. I didn't feel that this was a direct effect of being a hustler or a net-worthy individual, though. People who aren't hustlers can still motivate others to create and do amazing things. Afterwards, it got me thinking about neoliberalism and anarcho-capitalism and what it's really all about. And to me, it's all about recognition, that you're here and that you have existed. Congratulations, you did it. The bullies in high school have nothing on you now. You can buy 3 yachts, launch yourself into outer space, and buy Lamborghinis on a whim, and it only makes you feel good. It all seems very narcissistic, because at the end of the day, you can't control someone to admire you for your material accomplishments. Maybe that's why we have these ideologies sprout up, to convince others that material accomplishments should be revered. It almost seems like these individualistic ideologies come about to justify wealthy people's destructive greed. While writing this script, I actually came across a scientific article from a behavioral science journal that has identified a link between entrepreneurial spirit and narcissistic behavior, so I guess I wasn't too far off on that assumption. One thing before we move on, I want to discuss the connection between the political ideologies and Harry's ex-something. During this playthrough, I finally unlocked the dream where you see Harry's ex-something Dora on Voyager Road. This is a replay of the memory of the last time Harry saw her. In it, as he pleads for her to stay, he says, "But I'm rich now," to try and win her back. Remember how Savvy slipped up earlier and said, "Let's win her back"? In the Fascist Quest 2, there's a line about winning her back. Was it Revachol, or was it about Dora? Could the adoption of these ideologies in Disco Elysium be coping mechanisms for Harry? Maybe it's easier to blame the foreigners or taxes, rather than accept that the love of his life left him, and started a family with another man. With that, it makes me think, what could moralism and communism do to win her back? The beauty of the center. Moralism in Disco Elysium is the political ideology of maintaining the center. Nothing too far left, nothing too far right, protecting humanity from the political movements they deem to be eschatological, believing in a maintained balance of compromise and moderation in the advancement of humanity. If there is change, it is gradual, non-violent, and benefits everyone rather than specific classes. In Revachol, the current mode of government installed is a radical centrist one known as the Moralist International, also known as the Moral Intern. The Moral Intern were responsible for the downfall of the Commune of Revachol, with a swift and brutal military campaign known as Operation Deathblow. They even used the pre-existing communist Insulindian Citizens Militia and reformed it into the Revachol Citizens Militia, the police organization Harry works for. From the formation of the RCM and Operation Deathblow, it would seem that moralist governments are quite violent and oppressive. However, they actually only use violence to achieve a quote-unquote peace. Seeing as the center has to appeal to both sides of the fence, they believe in social liberation but also support the continuation of capitalism. But their interests and aims seem vague. From talking to an actual moral intern bureaucrat in the game, you can discover that social equality is definitely a part of their agenda, as they believe in democracy, and they definitely believe in a government-regulated capitalist economy similar to real-world Keynesian economics, but to a greater extent. This is based on the conversation with the same bureaucrat of the moral intern, who was a part of the committee of the Preisstabilité, controlling inflation to prevent radical economic events to ensure there is no social unrest. The ideology of moralism doesn't have a carbon copy in our own world, for comparison, although I think even most people can notice the cheeky references to liberals, with how most moralist dialogue choices refer to taking a non-stance on most issues. Directly comparing real-world centrism, radical centrism, or even liberalism to Disc Elysium's moralism doesn't entirely work. While they share some overlap in aims and methods, as I've discussed, the historical context for moralism is different, and its ideological underpinnings also vary. Moralism in Disc Elysium, unlike the two previous ideologies so far, is deeply romantic. Before we go on to that stuff, we should probably start talking about the quest itself and the connected thoughts to moralism in the game. The thought that is essential to doing a moralist run is Kingdom of Conscience. The main advantage of the thought is that for every moralist piece of dialogue you choose, you heal one morale. This is commenting on how walking around in a city like Revachol, not taking a stance on anything, would definitely make you feel comfortable, as opposed to the Revacholian nationhood thought, where you lose morale for every nationalist piece of dialogue you choose. Denial of the hardships of certain classes is indeed a comforting thought to have. The interesting part is that I also took the copper type of sorry cop in this playthrough. The thought attached to that, rigorous self-critique, heals your health and morale every time you fail a red check. Pair that up with a sober run and you'll never need to use medicine ever again to recover. If you want to do the quest yourself, I highly recommend, similar to the fascist quest, to get the thought early on, jamais vu, because you will need to know about the Pale in order to complete another prerequisite quest to finish the moralist quest. You will need to get the speed freaks into the church and conduct Suna's experiment with the 2mm hole in the world and do a difficult logic check to form a theory on it. If you've already talked to the moral intern bureaucrat earlier than starting the vision quest, do not worry. Find the smoker on the balcony and he will tell you where to find him. And lastly, I really recommend having a high empathy skill. Just trust me. That is all just to get the main part of the quest, which I'll reveal in a moment. On the 4th day of the investigation, your empathy will contact you saying that things in Revachol have gotten really bad, and you need to let someone know with authority know just how bad it is. Following the quest chain will lead you to the plan of contacting the moral intern by tuning into the radio frequency of the primary aerostatic aircraft above Revachol, known as Warship Archer. You will need to befriend either Suna or Noid to be your radio technician throughout this part of the quest. Once you establish contact, depending on if you're able to adjust their antennae properly or just fucking break it like I did, you can talk directly to the moral intern officials or at least an intermediary member of the Committee of Responsibility of Revachol. This is where I want to elaborate more on this idea that moralism is romantic, deeply so. During the final part of the quest, you can ask the radio operator aboard the Warship Archer about the nature of the moral intern. They say that they want humanity to endure, that they are the inheritors of Dolores Day's legacy, to preserve what was built by our forebearers, and they want to continue Dolores Day's project of human betterment. Before we go on, I'll need to explain who Dolores Day was. Dolores Day is responsible for the DeLorean era, which is akin to the real-world Enlightenment era that gave the world the idea of colonialism and social liberty. And the innocence known as Dolores Day is seen as an Übermensch of social liberalism and parliamentarianism. But it's more than that. People generally, even non-moralists, view Dolores Day as the most terrifying and most beautiful human being to have ever existed. She is, after all, the innocence responsible for the modern era. Harry's consciousness often comments on how beautiful she was, so much so that when you have the dream on Voyager Road, his psyche interprets the beauty of his ex-something as Dolores Day. There's one important piece of dialogue from Warship Archer that is really the ideological foundation of the moral intern, and it's twofold. To buy humanity enough time to achieve a democratic utopia and also protect the process from interference by any means necessary. That the idea of the state is to de-escalate conflicts for the safety of its people, no matter the cost. The state is, after all, a living thing that wants to survive and grow. One interpretation of this could be similar to how the writers posit a new thesis for fascism, is that liberalism is no longer about the continuation of human liberties and freedom, but has become the maintenance of the state. Throughout this essay, I've discussed the idea that ideology has become a coping mechanism for Harry's existential crisis, but also dealing with the heartbreak of losing his ex-something, Dora. In the Voyager Road dream on the islet, Harry even says to her that he's now taken responsibility and has become so fucking normal right now that everything is fine and she can come back. She even admits that this whole moralist thing doesn't sound like it's been done in good faith, but rather as a tool to win her back. In this case, moralism is something for Harry to believe in, to believe that he can get out of the hell that is his life, that his life would just get better by believing in the center, by believing that democracy, real democracy, is just around the corner. But it's not about real democracy for moralists. It's just euphemisms and misdirection. It isn't about moderating progressive change or about maintaining peace. It's about control. If the moral intern was as benevolent as they say they are, why do they have aerostatic warships with enough firepower to level a city patrol over Revachol like a sword of Damocles? Why is it that Revachol has been under moral intern rule for decades since the collapse of the Commune, dangling the idea of democracy for nearly 40 years? Because it's never been about the center, about democracy or peace. The moral intern government can only exist because of the power given to them via the status quo. They are trapped in a paradox. In the eyes of the coalition and its moral intern, the mob cannot be trusted. The mob is a Leviathan. And until the day when the moral intern feels their hand won't be bitten back by the Leviathan, Revachol will have to wait for its freedom. From failure to hope. The ideology of communism in Disco Elysium is something that really makes this game memorable. Typically speaking, communism in most mainstream games is used as a stand-in for some authoritarian ideology. But in Disco Elysium, there is more of an appeal to what communism is actually about: historical materialism. From this analysis comes a grand narrative of class warfare between the working class and the ruling class, or in more grandiose terms, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. A grand narrative to explain the course of human history since the founding of civilization. There is then the ultimate aim of the working class, the proletariat, creating its own government, or in Masovian terms, a dictatorship of the proletariat to control the relationship between its labor and what they produce, as well as adhering to planned economic policies to democratize the economy. Oh, and, putting the bourgeoisie up against the wall. The origin of communism in the world of Disco Elysium started in Grad, with revolutionary thinkers such as Krasmazov and Ignace Nielsen. In Grad, around the turn of the century, there was an outbreak of a virulent prion disease, known as Zarath. This led to the ruling governments being unable to contain its spread, leading to widespread civil unrest, allowing a man like Krasmazov to step up and give the people hope and end the pandemic. For Revachol, however, the main spark for the revolution was the mismanagement of the economy by the monarchy. This led to fighting between the emerging communists and the loyalists of the suzerain. The Commune of Revachol was founded after the dissolving of the suzerain. As we've discussed in the moralist section of this video, we know that roughly 6 years later, after its founding, the coalition invaded Revachol in Operation Deathblow. The coalition hunted communists for at least a decade. Even some of the more moderate members of the Communist Party capitulated to the coalition. As the spirit of resistance ebbed like the tide, it wasn't long before the revolution was over. Communism became a ghost that haunted the world. Communism as a political ideology is a risque option to put into any video game. As mentioned earlier, communist governments have often been used as token bad guys due to historical accounts. However, you do have to remember who writes these accounts. But there's no escaping the reality that communist governments, even the communards in the anti-centennial revolution, have been involved in atrocities and brutality. Then again, so have the moralists, with Operation Deathblow. But I think in Disco Elysium, the writers managed to remove the real-world historical residue that it has garnered, presenting it in a new unblemished light and treating the ideology to its core understandings, but with a healthy dose of absurdism and tongue-in-cheek commentary. My last and final playthrough for this game was what I like to call the Communist Superstar playthrough, where I adhered to the communist ideology, but also had the superstar copper type. Harry, being the deranged superstar shouting about doing it for the working class, was one of the most fun experiences I've ever had in an RPG. When you've set enough communist choices of dialogue, your rhetoric has no qualms telling you what communism is actually about. Failure, which is a very interesting point which we'll discuss later, once we talk about other things like the thought known as Masovian socioeconomics. Masovian socioeconomics is the eponymous name for real-world Marxism, applying dialectics and materialist analysis to human history and economics. However, the thought of Masovian socioeconomics doesn't entirely stick to this. It more appeals to the cursory progression of what communism has become over time. It is a way to change your perspective, an awakening of a new consciousness. The writing in Disco Elysium continually hints at the idea that being a communist makes you feel smart, almost arrogantly so. This is reinforced by the thought I mentioned earlier, which for every piece of leftist dialogue you gain 4 XP. It is not without its drawbacks though, with negatives to authority and visual calculus. Communism is treated with the same absurdist lens the other ideologies receive in this game. It is consistently portrayed as a flaccid ideology, rooted in failure, and is secretly a reason to be violent. While it may make you intellectually invigorated, it's portrayed that it also makes you delusional, such as when Harry begins to think he might be Krasmazov because they have similar facial hair, and things only get more absurd as a communist when you start the actual quest. By the way, if you're going to do a communist run, I highly recommend putting lots of points into rhetoric. He seems to be the closet comrade and unlocks a lot of leftist dialogue. One thing I have to say about the political vision quest for communism is that it's quite easy. You really only need to talk to 2 NPCs, and to find them, you just need to follow your nose. Because apparently, communists reek of the malodorous scent of failure. Then you wait until 2200 that evening to meet the underground communist network, and upon finding them, you will apparently engage in heated debates about what to do to build communism, and also complain about other communists. Because one of the most important parts of being a communist is arguing with other communists. On the 4th day of the investigation, your rhetoric will contact you, telling you that only 0.0001% of communism has been built, and that it's time to get organized. You talk to Sydney the Skull to discover where the underground communists will meet, and Manana will tell you the password to get in. And really, that's it. When you enter the meeting, you will see the 2 and only members of this society, Ulysses and Staban. It's not long before it's revealed, though, that these communists are a part of a revolutionary group. A revolutionary reading group. Speaking of books, reading the literature you find throughout Martinez actually becomes relevant in this quest, such as the La Fumée magazine in the dockworker's office. And most surprisingly, I played a game of suzerainty with Kim to pass the time, and even that became relevant. There's even a bit where Harry addresses that playing a game like suzerainty can force players to question what subjectivity means in a ludonarrative context, and reinforces the logic of colonialism, which is fucking amazing. Then it starts to get into the main point, about Ignace Nielsen's theory of inframaterialism. Inframaterialism is the idea that having a revolutionary consciousness will actually have an effect on your physical surroundings. This reminded me of the philosophy known as epistemological materialism, mixed with a bit of the psychological phenomenon known as the Pygmalion effect. Once the interview to enter the group is over, you're left with some light reading material. To continue the quest, you need to read the book they gave you. According to inframaterialists, having a revolutionary consciousness produces a metaphysical entity known as plasm, and can influence the physiology of communists, such as robust, thick facial hair, allow communards to have sex for up to 8 hours at a time, and even improve crop yields. Yes, you heard me. Being a communist can make you a thick, bearded sex machine that can improve crop yields, which sounds like it's something out of a Monty Python skit. If you read further, it just gets more insane. Inframaterialists believe that once your revolutionary consciousness has been raised sufficiently, you can develop telepathy, and you can now build buildings that defy bourgeois physics. But this last part is interesting. This theory is based on the idea that if the financial system operates on faith, so maybe architecture can too. And when you think about it, money and financial systems do operate on a system of faith. Once you go back to talk to Steban again, there is an unexpected turn in the tone of conversation. Once you complete the rhetoric check, you're given the chance to ask, what's the point of all this? Which is a resonating piece of dialogue that echoes in all of the political vision quests, usually asked by Kim. The writers here then insert their new thesis for communism. Communism is in fact a secular theology whereby faith is invested not in the ethereal divine, but the future of humanity. That communists are not idealists, but humanists. That the future can be better if humanity is willing to believe it can change. That someday we don't need the invisible hands of the free market or the visible hands of the state to tell us how to live our lives. That humanity did fail to liberate itself. So it kind of makes sense that communism is rooted in failure. Once you start observing the world and asking yourself how the fuck we got into this mess we're in, you might start looking for ways to get out of it. As faith in God and state further recede into the pale of history, perhaps it only makes sense to replace it with a faith in humanity. It only asks that we believe that humanity has a chance to get ourselves out of the shit we've put ourselves in. Communists see that the world is broken, but not irreparable. Communism isn't about putting the bourgeoisie up against the wall, not about the proletariat achieving its epic destiny. It's about hope and believing humanity can be better. Steban says, in dark times, should the stars also go out? In dark times, all we have is hope, because it's all we have left after everything is gone. When people ask me why I love Disco Elysium so much, I often respond with how this game is something that is actually new. It is a game that is unlike anything I've ever played. This game made me feel things. It made me think in new ways. It made me laugh like I've never laughed before, and it's made me sadder than I've ever been. Connecting with Harry's sense of alienation, how his soul has been ground to gravel by the world, how he's over-radiated, made up of all the activity of hundreds of people in the world, a story of one man drowning in the human species. While Harry's story in Disco Elysium is core to its message, this video delved into the modern political ideologies presented in it. From it, I hoped we learned what made it work. Treating each ideology with a balanced palette of absurdism and earnest deliberation was the perfect way to communicate the tenets of each ideology. Because of this, the writing avoided becoming overly preachy. Each political quest has been written to exemplify a new thesis towards the ideology being discussed. Fascism being an ideology fueled by a frustrated middle class feeling outgunned in sexual competition, how ultraliberalism is a belief system to justify narcissism, moralism as a reason for the state to grow and evolve and to control the unruly mob, and communism is a humanist outlook of the future. Each thesis offers new insights into the current political ideologies of our day. The ludonarrative integration of these ideologies work their way into the thought cabinet, which I've praised before as a brilliant way to build your characters in an RPG. The thoughts associated with the ideology indirectly change the experience someone has in Disco Elysium, from drinking alcohol to numb the pain and become strong, to become rich with no way to spend the money, feeling comfortable being radically neutral in all things political, and being a smart boy with impressive facial hair who can win lofty arguments. Ideologies are essentially the adoption of willingly false ideas, skirting around the realness of existence. Often, ideologies are talked about as if they're singular interpretations of the world, when in fact, it is merely an intermingling of the fuzziness of language and our perceived relationships between individuals through subjective lenses. Even if you believe you're not in it, the way you see the world is still affected by it. What political ideologies tend to obscure is the realness of suffering. Many belief systems that are not strictly ideologies, such as Buddhism and Stoicism, accept that life is about suffering, and this game offers a window to how the modern human might deal with that dread. In the case for Harry du Bois, who lost the love of his life, he uses copious amounts of alcohol, drugs, delusion, and finger guns. But as we've seen, he can also use ideology.